So, in order to achieve personal and community safety, I'm having a conversation with Tom McKay, who is a world renowned expert in CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, looking at the drivers or the practical interventions and behaviors that would lend themselves eventually to safety and ethics, which is then the North Star that we're trying to achieve.
So we're looking at the drivers and how to, through a cascading impact, affect those three pillars so that we have holistic security.
To me, it sort of reminds me it's in Maslow's needs hierarchy, and but it is there. What you're talking about is all foundational pieces, and without those in place, everything else is really just a house of cards. So.
Right. In the concept of CPTED, would you say that that's shifted as well for you, and or has that broadened?
Yes, it has, but not in a conventional way. Of course, now we've had over a period of time, certainly second generation and even third generation. I think I've even heard whispers of fourth, which for me, because I was doing CPTED prior to these, add-ons, as I call them, and I mean in a sense of the model. They kind of, they're clumsy. It's like a tree growing rings, and it's sort of for me, where does it stop? And I still prefer to do traditional CPTED because it's tactical. and the reason I have always difficulty with these add-ons is that we were doing organizing neighborhood watches, block parties, neighbors night out, a lot of things that they actually use as examples of second generation. I was doing neighborhood watch. I was a coordinator in my area in 1980. And so this comes along in what, 96, and we're calling it now second generation.
Mm-hmm.
It's valuable to look at those connectivity pieces if you're not doing it. And I actually think where the greatest value is with social media, it's changing the way we connect. We're losing the personal touch. So maybe, you have to have some sort of playbook to, for the people coming in behind.
Mm-hmm.
But for those of us who are old school, talking literally over the backyard fences, there was, it was something we always did. But for me, so I went in a bit of a different direction. One thing I found, that if you go to CPTED criticisms, they often said it was deterministic. So I always explain that in CPTED's sort of determinism is based on the notion, basically, that if you build it, they will come. And, that's just an old axiom. But not only will they come, but they'll conform. That's CPTED. And I'm saying, well, hold on a minute, because there is something to that. First we shape our environments, then the environments shape us, as Churchill said that in rebuilding the British Parliament. But what happens is that the people are very creative, intuitive. They'll find goal rounds. So CPTED is deterministic, but what will happen is that you put a gate on a drive, and I have a photo of this, an aerial photo, and you can actually see tire marks around the gate, and so what have you really accomplished? And in light of that, for about 20 years, I've been looking at this concept that I call behavioral-based design. So I like to study behavior first and then design for it. The better you understand the psychology, really, you speak of that, of human behavior, and you don't have to, you can be a behaviorist, just an observer, really. A police officer is a good, vantage point from which to do that. But if you take that into account and then you design, well, maybe in that gate example that I talked about, that you have to put a swale as sort of a ditch, or you could put armor stone or something there to discipline the traffic so that it had to wait for the gate. Now, it still doesn't preclude the idea that they might just drive through the gate. That's
Right.
another option.
Yeah.
But
Funny.
I always say, you can't make people design can't make people do anything they don't want to do, but
Right.
it can make them not want to do it. So, does somebody say, well, I want to go through this gate, but if you sort of straitjacket the approach in, so to speak, then for the average person who generally follows rules, that's a bridge too far. They're not going to drive through. Criminal element, they'll do what they want, generally speaking,
Yeah.
until they get caught.
What kind of areas does crime prevention through, or like, what kind of tips would you have? Because late career, I've realized that a lot of like the international work that I'm doing for policy, crime, criminal justice is actually starts at the grassroots level as well, like a lot of it, where all different aspects of society are woven together in a very resilient and like a very diverse social fabric. The implementations often have to come from the grassroots as well, sometimes through police, sometimes through government policy, or and grassroots. Could you, I mean, like for our initial conversation, like could you give me some practical, like tangible implementations for communities to have their neighborhoods more safe and to prevent crime in their communities?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because at the end of the day, we often say in policing, where my background is, that the community is the eyes and ears of police, and it's true. You do need that, but you can extend that to say that without their basically involvement on a broader level, maybe an environmental design level, maybe it's just joining a neighborhood watch, maybe it's just availing
Joining in, like,
themselves of
in the
Crime Stop.
community. Yeah.
Yes, there needs to be some realization that the police are not the arbiters of what gets implemented and what doesn't. It has to fall to the grassroots level. So just basic things that you can do that might discourage a burglar taking interest in your property. It's kind of simple, but unless you kind of have a bit of a instinct of what they might be looking for, it's hard again to prevent that. At some basic level, I do think that I've over time created a crime prevention academy. I know I've discussed that with you before, and it gives people the knowledge that they need to keep them and their families safe and their property as well. And and they're not only eager for this information, but they're willing to put it into practice. And so what I don't like is people having to learn from what I call the school of hard knocks. In other words, we don't look forward. We kind of look in the rearview mirror and we react to something. So if you were broken into, you say, okay, well, now I'm going to have to obviously improve my locks or do something, and you usually react to that last occurrence, but you still don't look forward and say, well, what actually drew attention to my house? Did I have an away look? Was I away and I didn't, arrange to have flyers picked up and, the place ended on a timely basis, and et cetera. So it's an individual responsibility. You can organize the neighbors, so it's a neighborhood responsibility. But it's really, I think the fundamental thing is recognition that, that the police, it's not like dialing up Uber Eats. The police, can't deliver safety. It's part and parcel, coming on everybody to join in that process.
I love that. And I didn't really introduce, like in this video, your background, but I did allude to how long you've been teaching this topic. So I know that you had the crime prevention academies in a variety of settings, and including for a variety of audiences, for example, children, families, and parents as well, which is really valuable. And again, I really appreciate the work that you're doing, for sure. So what would you teach in your academies to, for example, families, including the parents?
Yeah, is we have to give them an understanding of crime prevention. A lot of people, I read a standard definition of crime prevention, and I'll ask them what is the most important word. And invariably, people, and this includes police officers who come through the training, they generally miss the most important word. There's a lot of important words: recognize, initiate action, remove, reduce the threat, and that sort of thing, all part of the definition. But the most important word actually says at the very beginning, it's anticipation. If you don't anticipate something, chances are you're not going to recognize it. If it's, for instance, some sort of fraud somebody's trying to perpetuate upon you or whatever, if you don't anticipate it, you won't recognize it. If you don't recognize it, you're not going to initiate any action to reduce that threat. And so it is just really starting to look at the world, with that idea of looking before you leap, so to speak.
Interesting.
The old axiom: if it's too good to be true, it probably is. That is actually true.
Too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. So that's a fundamental piece. But then we build from there. We talk about personal safety. We talk about home security. We break it down into modules, thematic weeks type of thing. And I could give you examples of each, but I think the first and foremost thing is that people have to almost think crime prevention, because that's what's going to stop you. When I get something that I'm thinking, I don't know about that, the first thing I do is get on the internet and actually see if there is some scam associated with it.
I know that you alluded and mentioned community looking out for each other. And neighborhoods, yes. I would love for you to expand on that, because I really believe that as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's actually two things that come to mind. First is a bit of a story in a sense, but it was based on a real life circumstance. I was asked to go out and take a look at a gentleman's home. He had not been the victim of a break-in, but 2 doors down he had been. Now, he was an insurance adjuster. So he was savvy, and not only, ways to keep your home safe, but, he kind of thought crime prevention, he's thinking ahead. And so I went through his house, and because he was an insurance adjuster, he, most of the things that I would have recommended to do, he had already done. He put a security strike plate, which is on the frame of the door, and it actually makes the door way more stronger than, for instance, we're in Ontario, the Ontario Building Code, and against forced entry attack. And, a lot of these things are in place. And so I sat down with him at the dining room table, and I was going through, and I really thought, I think I had one single recommendation. But he went on and he started to say, well, yeah, but I don't really feel safe. And then he started to talk about his brother, and his brother lived in a totally different area. He was in a newer subdivision, privacy fences everywhere, people, he complained because his father would sit out on the porch, and people would walk by the sidewalk all day, but nobody would say hi or anything like that.
This is his brother, right? Like, this is his brother in the area where no one says hi to each other.
No, I'm sorry. This was him. This was him. Now, the brother was at an opposite type of thing, where they would have these block parties, and
Okay.
it's really a communal thing.
And so your
These
friend,
were,
insurance adjuster, was in the newer development.
that's right. And the brother was in an older development with lower fences, the ones that you speak over the fence and get to know your neighbors.
Yeah.
I have one like that. I'm in a 50s development,
And you're going to leave it like that.
I'm going to leave, you better believe I'm going to leave it like that.
Yeah.
And people can actually see your yard, and you're not there. You can balance that with privacy. Yes, there's a couple of hedges and things, but I mean, it's not like that the whole way. And so so he was then saying that he was kind of hanging on that and thinking about moving away. And I said, well, you generally speaking, you're not going to move away from crime. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I said if you were to do that, I think the problem is you're in a neighborhood that you long for a more traditional neighborhood where you get to know your neighbors, and the neighbors know you, and everybody looks out for everybody else.
Yeah.
That's really powerful. That's again a kind of a core piece. Without that piece, that those connections and things, without that piece in place, even with open sight lines, which CPTED preaches, generally speaking, or at least it tends to emphasize or exploit. It's all going to fall apart. If people just keep on walking by you when you're on your front porch and not paying any attention to you, chances are somebody's at your door and doing something. They're not going to pay any attention to that either. So,
yeah, perfect.
So I said to him, well, if you are going to move, you should move to one of these. I actually told him certain neighborhoods where, that were built back in the 50s and so forth, where he would probably feel more comfortable, even his brother's neighborhood, for instance. Now that gets me to the second piece, what you can do, because I mean, you can always compensate for and do this in any neighborhood. But I don't know if you've ever heard of the concept of a cocoon watch, but I'm a very big proponent of that. What a cocoon watch is, you've heard of a neighborhood watch, where neighbors are loosely organized and look out for each other, but it's kind of hard to it's not kind of a tangible thing you can touch, or you might get the odd email or post, and people are kind of griping about this and that, or some of them go dormant for a while or trail off. Well, a cocoon watch is within your command. So what that is, and I really recommend it for somebody where they have experienced a crime problem within an area. Say you were the victim of a break-in. Well, statistically, at least in Canada, once you've been broken in, you're 12 times more likely to be broken into again. Okay. Now, I won't explain that. We'll just take it as it is for the moment. But if that is the case, of course, I like to impart things that victims of break-ins could do to improve themselves. But, in circumstances like that, with odds like that, I advocate people engage in a cocoon watch. In other words, you know how to contact, your backdoor neighbor, your side neighbors, your neighbor across the street. Some people do, some people don't. And it's important. And it's important they know also your street address, because let's say your backdoor neighbor sees something suspicious going on at your home.
Right.
And they know the address to their street, but they're not even sure of what street you live on. Right. Not everybody, knows the geography that well. Yeah. So at the end of the day, it's important they know your address so they can direct police to an address. But the idea of the cocoon watch can be summed up in this: that if you were to knock on each of these people's doors in the immediate circle around your home and say, I would recommend you actually tell them, I was broken into, the police were here, I made some changes, but they also tell me that there's 12 times more likely, the person could be back. Right. I made these changes. I just wanted to ask you to keep a good eye on my house. If you see anybody, they say within the next 30 days is the most likelihood that they'll come back. And in turn, I'll keep an eagle eye out for your house as well, because I'm just concerned that if they're not successful in breaking into mine, they may go elsewhere,
Right.
any of one of you.
Yeah.
But that's everybody, knowing they anticipate what's happened. They're educated now. They
Right.
anticipate that, well, this isn't just somebody over and maybe he's having the house painted. This is actually a burglar, that's doing something strange at the house. Don't invent a reason. And each person will look after the next.
Yes. Yeah. Because we know each other. We know who belongs to their family and who doesn't. Like,
exactly. It's powerful.
and a lot of it, I think, is just, saying hi to each other, like on the way in and out, like you mentioned, new developments and new, like, in North America compared to, like villages in Europe and in the global South as well. Like the expectations are the culture is completely different, revolving around this concept of community. And like, somehow nuclear families have moved away from cohesive, social network.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no. I talk about this community garden that was put out in Kitchener and dropped crimes 66%. But one of the things that was a barrier at that time, there was a language problem in that there was a Laotian community and they didn't speak English, and so because the linguistic barrier can be a barrier. People will be in silence, and if I don't know you, if you haven't spoken to that person, you really don't care for them, and it can even get worse than that. Well, in this garden setting, though, they found that the Laotians were great gardeners, and they would grow things, and there still might be a language barrier, but if your neighbor who speaks Laotian passes you a tomato, a universal gesture of friendship,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hi, friend, every time,
Right.
and you try to communicate, as opposed to saying, well, I can't talk, they're Laotian, they don't speak.
Totally.
They can't speak English, and so it breaks down the barriers, and it's really good because it's easy to just kind of almost write off an entire group of people just because you feel I can't communicate with
right them. There's a lack of understanding. There's a lack of identification, because that group is from a different culture or different race or different language. Suddenly we shut our walls down and say, well, we're good on our own, and
exactly,
we're good on our without them, and that's proceed. Yeah.
And there was a study, I don't know if you're aware of it, but it was a very good study, and this goes back to the 80s in New York City. But there's a researcher, an academic, her name was Sally Merry, Merry, and she had a paper on defensible space that is basically undefended. So, Oscar Newman, the architect, he'd talk about these low-rise things, and, a lot of these factors would be in play, but so it was kind of a defensible, medium-rise structure, but yet, the crime was happening. And she identified the language barriers as being that. And so if you can break that through that, because it is a wall. I like your terminology. It's a wall, and it takes effort to scale or go through or around a wall.
Right. And that's why you implement that in CPTED.
Yeah. So because ultimately it is kind of like the secret sauce of CPTED. People think, oh, the built environment. Well, it's all about the built environment. Well, yeah, it's kind of cause and effect to some extent, but what really keeps people safe is other people. You need a critical intensity of people to keep an environment safe. You can have a perfectly safe park during the day because there's lots of users in and out, and it's daytime hours, it's active, people are friendly because it's daytime and all that. At night, that same environment is actually scary, if not even sometimes dangerous, because you lack the critical intensity of people. Those who might gravitate to that environment during those times, knowing that, most people are tucked in bed or, not coming out, after dusk. You're not going to a park after dusk. And so it sort of changes who even the users of the park become.
Mm-hmm.
So you need a critical intensity of people to keep other people safe. At the end of the day, it's not the environment, it's how it's being used, and whether you have that witness potential. Who are you going to, if you think you're going to be followed? Well, who do you go to
Yeah.
to look for help? If you think you're
Who's
being
gonna hear
followed.
you when you call? Like,
Exactly.
who's there?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why we need to step away from that silo thinking and
Yeah.
that level of independence where we ignore the interconnectedness of
Yes.
each other. For sure.
Yeah.
You mentioned a critical intensity. Could you touch? Sorry, I forget what that means. Like, I mean, I know Jay Jacobs talks about that as well, like frequent interaction. How would you define that? Like, if you could explain it.
Yeah. So when I use the term, it's sort of borrowed from the fellow Tim Crow who taught me CPTED. He would talk about you need the critical intensity of people to keep other people safe. If you're in an area which is you're isolated, or it isolates you, or it and it could just be for the sake of, again, the time of day. I like to use the example of a subway platform. Okay, now that's not maybe the best example, but if we like to think about it, less safe and more safe. Okay, I think we can come to some sort of general consensus.
Right.
So let's say you're on this subway platform, and it doesn't necessarily have to be rush hour. It's actually, but it's an actively used time. Okay, now you're going to contrast that with that same subway platform in sort of the late night time frame when it's lesser used, and in fact, there might only be a couple of people waiting for a train. That train rolls in, and you just come down the stairs, and now you're the only person in that platform, with the exception maybe one other.
Right.
And maybe that other is just because they're hanging around. They're not really going anywhere. We don't know what they're. There's maybe some. Yeah. Now, which one of those scenarios that I painted are you going to feel more safe and less safe? Now, if you think about the one
in the latter, but how would governments or policymakers prevent that from happening?
Well, that's an interesting question, because sometimes you do have to compensate for a lack of natural surveillance, which is other users. It is self-correcting. First of all, in the period that train will, you're waiting for that train, others will probably, if it's a transit system,
eventually,
slowly, they come in. But we do have video surveillances. In Toronto, they have this designated waiting area, which they have a call station as well, so that it's not, you're not relying on some operator theoretically seeing you on camera, which is a kind of a faint hope, to be honest. So you want to be able to slap something that gets immediate relief. Part of that plan is, when he's not anticipating that when they hit the panic button on that, duress station,
right?
I'll just say, oh no, that's it, that was an accidental hit, because it's being cameraed, and the cameras go live when that happens. He doesn't plan for that. So the fact that you're doing something, and this is what I tell all people, you have got to have a plan. The criminal element, or somebody who will take advantage of you, does have a plan. So your plan has to become the plan. By sitting at the designated waiting area, by slapping that signal, your plan now becomes the plan. that person who was a threat to you now has to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And the way most people deal with stress, and I think I know you know this, is fight or flight. And most will choose flight. Like, do I really need to, But that's what I always say, that for people in general, I've mentioned this in a previous conversation, but this notion of you do have to have a plan so that circumstances do not overtake you.
Interesting.
Because if you kind of what I call blunder through life, you're not really thinking about what could happen. I mean, you don't have to be paranoid, but you should have your, radar up, antenna up a little bit. Then you should, think, okay, if this happens, here's what I'm going to do. A really, really quick example. I was in Myrtle Beach one time, and I decided around dusk to walk out into the neighborhoods, residential neighborhood, but I knew there was a kind of another hotel or something further along. And I see 5 young men walking towards me in the middle of the street. Now, I'm clearly outnumbered. I'm in an area that I'm not sure. It looks on the surface to be relatively safe. I hadn't asked the hotel clerk, because my eyes were telling me I think it's a pretty good neighborhood. But so immediately at that, I started to look at houses where lights were on.
Okay. Yeah.
So and that's what I tell other people. So where am I going to go if I'm feeling threatened? I'm starting to hatch a plan. And that's the important part, because you don't want circumstances to overtake you. I don't want those guys to get into close proximity to me, come up with some, excuse for, approaching, getting in my space, saying, hey, you got a cigarette or something? Which is common, type of thing that they might say.
Right.
And then they take advantage of the proximity. So always think, whether it's a subway platform, whether it's a street, whether you're in a park and it's getting dusky. First of all, fundamentally, should you be walking into there at that point? But secondly, do you have a plan?
Mm-hmm.
I can give you one other quick example of what to do in plan. Sometimes I ask people, how many times do you think you're being followed? Well, I use the park example. Let's say you're on a trail and it's only you and somebody, that person. Now you're thinking, gee, I come into the park and they're still following me. I'm being followed. I'm feeling, anxiety, fear needle, as I call it, is going to the right. And I said, well, you have to have a plan. And so the key would be, for instance, typically dusk is still early enough that you'll get people, dog walkers, others, that are just maybe exiting the park. But the next person you see coming in your direction, I actually tell people, if you're fearful that you're being followed, that you really want to bring this issue to a head. That I actually advocate turning around, pointing to that person and saying in a loud voice, "Are you following me?" Now, if you're not, the person just thinks no, but the other person is going to say no as well, because he doesn't want to help themselves. And it also communicates to this other person, wait a minute, there's something going on here. And they may say, hey, you can walk out with me, which is probably a good thing, or at least that, or you can stay in conversation with that stranger, that dog walker, whoever it is, somebody that there's no, you're probably relatively safe with, before disengaging and maybe going out the other way, But you have to have a plan.
That's another reason why it's so important or valuable to know your community, like what you're explaining. I'm going for a walk and there's dog walkers around. Suddenly I'm the only person on the street with someone else, but there are people I know 3-4 houses down. Okay, that's my house and I'm in now.
Yes.
Some tips that I've used, like while on travel and by myself, are that I always stay in lit areas. If I am alone, I have my senses are like spidey senses, like all directions for a kilometer. I'll know, okay, if there's a building in the way, okay, what risk is that building? Like, is it a shop that's open, or is it like a shady, broken down, empty building? And so, your brain starts computing automatically once you've had training in this area, so that you're able to predict, okay, this is what might happen, and then this is how I'm going to mitigate it.
Yes. And you said something that's really resonated with me when you said my senses are, and you're going like this, which to me is like one of the key senses is hearing. And I'll tell you why hearing is so important. And probably the most important sense, really, in the sense that, first of all, when I study behavior, like 96% of the time, especially when we tend to walk, we're on automatic mode.
We are.
Like we're just kind of,
just looking ahead. Not paying attention. Yeah.
You're not paying attention. And the reason why hearing is so important is that in a lot of cases, you are not going to see a potential assailant. That would presuppose that they're coming towards you and going to present themselves to you. It's more likely, actually, they rush you from the side, from the back, that sort of thing.
Right.
And or if somebody's calling out, even raising an alarm. If you have the earbuds in or whatever it is you're doing, you're not going to, A, know there's a danger there, but B, can possibly, I help. Can I even if it's just calling police, saying, something's happening here.
Something's already happening.
So, it's but when we can't hear, we really are at a major disadvantage, when
we have our music in or our earmuffs on.
Yeah. I mean, my wife goes for a walk. It's, okay, it's in the neighborhood and things, and but she'll go off on her own and she's got, listening to her music. Yeah.
In your own neighborhood.
I get it, but especially when you're in your own neighborhood, you feel safe.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you have to absolutely, but you have to make it a conscious decision. When you go out, it has to be a relatively safe time.
It reminds me of what you said about line of sight.
Yeah.
Right. You can explain that a little bit more when it comes to CPTED. But when I'm walking, the way that we're seeing hearing and envisioning it right now is like a line of sight as well. Like I want to make sure that I have a 360 degrees consciousness about my surroundings, divert my attention to those areas in advance and keep enough distance from that corner in case something does pop out or somebody is there.
Yes, and what you're doing is actually, it's very good because consciously you're thinking of this. You're reading the environment. You're thinking ahead. There were some researchers. It doesn't really get into the CPTED literature per se that much, but they came up with the concept of prospect. Prospect is like how how far to the horizon can you sort of see like what is blocking your lines of sight and things. If I have a blind corner, there's no prospect, in other words, until I get to that corner and know what's beyond on the other side. It could be a drug deal going down. It could be somebody's already assaulted somebody just rifling through their things. And the other idea that's closely associated with these researches is lurk lines. So this is, if you had a fence, for instance, could be a privacy fence, and at the end of the fence, we all have that certain instinct, it could be pulled in behind there, but that's actually based off the notion of these lurk lines, because that's where people could lurk. Yeah. So, that's a simple way of prospect, which is just opening up your line, your line of sight, and lurk lines, where and if you just know nothing else but just to kind of think consciously about prospect and lurk lines, that'll keep your eyes open.
Yeah. But then when you reverse that process, you see, okay, what could happen in the future and what can I do now?
Yes.
Impact it. And I love this for security and safety.
I
love this concept of using your imagination and being creative and thinking about what could happen. And it's so fun too, right? Like, the world is full of endless possibilities.
Oh, yes. and it's funny because I get into the conversations with my wife because she doesn't tend to, you know, she doesn't see danger until danger sees her. And so,
Yeah.
and she has a tendency, and I'm always saying, oh, you should commenting about this or that, and I think it actually, to some extent, grows tiresome for her. When
Well, it's great that you have her as a wife and that she has you as a husband, because
yeah,
you do that work for her.
yes, but wait. I mean, we had a. I don't. I hesitate to use the example because I don't want to. But she just said last night, basically, well, you're right. And I said, did you hear the news? And I said, no. And she was telling me about Puerto Vallarta, the fighting that's going on, the streets, the burning cars in the streets, and people are told to shelter in place and things. And for many years, I said, no, I'm not going. I don't go to places where there's drug cartels.
Yeah,
I just don't.
it can happen.
And I call it, and I'm not, it's not specific to, I'm not labeling a country or anything. I'm just saying that if there's strong drug cartels, it's on what I call my no-fly list. I just don't go.
It's a fault
And
line.
I maintain a no-fly list because based off, and I know the embassies will do travel advisories, etc. But I take mine up a notch because it's what you said. It's the future, and I just see that, okay, that could just shift in a heartbeat.
Absolutely. I was looking at that.
And it's unpredictable. I can't control it.
Yeah.
I get caught in the middle of it.
Yes. A lot of international instability, for example, in what's going on in Mexico and in other countries, even in the US, what's happening right now.
Yes, I agree.
A lot of that is instability and insecurity.
Yes.
But a lot of that is caused by lack of international cooperation or a lack of compliance with international law.
Yes.
So because, there has been some political and governance instability in Mexico, this has permitted these cartels to evolve and to, now that this leader is gone, to erupt. Because there's a lack of ability for the international community to intervene in Trump's administration, there is, what's going on is kind of impeding human rights at certain points, and privacy of citizens. And this, again, could be resolved if there was more compliance with international liberties. And then you take Africa, an African continent or country, for example, where there's there's financing of military, rogue military armies, which I've done work with and I've met, which is illegitimate. So international cooperation for me is like countries looking out for each other, akin to like community members looking out for each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just big examples of them, and yeah, there's I mentioned prior to coming on sort of that Maslow's need hierarchy, but if you don't have fundamentals in place, whether it's housing, whether it's food security, whether it's just basic things. I won't go this far, but I had a colleague of mine, he's since passed, and he was very well grounded. He worked in prevention too, but he said, actually, we're just 3 days or something away from kind of anarchy. Like if the food, suddenly stopped going on the grocery shelves, etc., and things of that nature. And I mean, it could be done. It could be, I mean, there's things that a meteor strike, does anything, it's craziness.
Yeah, out of the blue.
A catastrophic thing, but you would see that it doesn't take, you would then realize how fragile, like society is, because there's a lot of things that as long as basic needs are addressed and or satisfied, and not maybe more towards leaning towards satisfied than addressed,
Yeah.
then I think everything works. But it is sobering nonetheless. I could always hear him say that, because I really, it sounded apocalyptic, and it still does to some extent. But he's probably not all that wrong, So it just underscores how important this is.
I think that a lot of issues are also relating in those countries to lack of trust in police themselves.
Yes.
What would a community then, how would they evolve if there's a lack of structure, governance, or policing in that area for safety and security?
Wow, that's a tough one. It's almost really beyond my experience, because, being here in North America, there's almost some sort, at some basic level, we take these things not entirely for granted, especially the fragility of the trust that, accrues to police, and sometimes, is easily shedded away. One thing I do say, that I think it is more directed to people who might gravitate to policing, because you always want those to be the people who do want to make the place, do want to help people and do it in a way that makes the place better.
Yeah.
But trust in police is slowly earned, but it's lost. It can be lost almost instantly.
Right.
So just to always bear that in mind. That and so in that regard, if we get people who appreciate that. I had great advice by an officer. He's actually a Toronto officer when I was in their auxiliary, but he and I think he knew I was interested in professional policing at that time, but he said, try to make every contact with the public a positive experience, even if you had to arrest the guy.
No, that's
and I used that as my philosophy, and I shared that with every community college class I've ever taught in policing, and new recruits. And because, boy, that's almost like all of Sir Robert Peel's principles wrapped up into one little soundbite. And honestly,
love it. So good.
Yeah.
So good.
This would be said, if policing would be better if everybody, at least was aware and/or heeded, that idea. Yeah, sometimes even if you do have to arrest a person, it's not exactly a positive day in their life, but they can at least felt that, the person was fair, he treated me with respect, he did his job, and on some level they're even grateful for it.
Amazing. Yes. And it's an example of the police practicing that community development and community interaction.
Yeah, and one quick side note, I can tell it works because I was in traffic enforcement and wrote a lot of speeding tickets and different tickets. Of course, that's part of the job in traffic enforcement or accident investigation, but I actually had 2 letters of thanks from people who received a ticket from me. So, which sounds ridiculous because I remember.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
it totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowing you as well, I think
Yeah.
you'd have a positive experience, interaction. Okay, thank you so much, Tom.
My pleasure, Samina. Thank you for this opportunity and your platform, and continue to do the great work you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah. For me, ethics, it's a lot of people thrown around that word, right? Ethics, right?
Yeah.
And it's who's ethics? Which religion? Which culture? But for me, ethics is security, and it's a very universal principle that can be understood throughout cultures and languages and borders. And so ethics is security and safety.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's the North Star.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect. And that's my logo. It's Advanced Ethics with a North Star.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.